Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Creation Matters podcast, where we focus on sharing the reliability of the Bible, real science, and the gospel. I'm your host, Preston Knapp, and joining me in studio is Ashley Coulter. Ashley, glad to have you along.
Glad to be here.
Today, we have the privilege of interviewing a very special guest, Dr. Mark Armitage. He is the senior microscopist with the Dinosaur Soft Tissue Research Institute. So, Dr. Mark, thanks for joining our show today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So today we're going to be talking about dinosaur soft tissue. That's something that we, of course, like to cover here. We talk about dinosaurs. We talk about fossils. We talk about all kinds of stuff. But we're going to be talking specifically about the discovery of soft tissue in dinosaur fossils and how long it can last. Can it really last millions of years? That's what we're often told, is that these dinosaur bones are millions of years, but has the discovery of soft tissue shed new light on the subject? So just starting off with some definitions, I guess. Dr. Mark, can you share with our audience what we mean when we are talking about soft tissue inside fossils?
Right. Thank you. Well, good. Our bones have soft tissues in them. We have bone cells that live throughout our bone, and they manage the bone. They repair it, fix it, renew it. There are also veins, vessels, and nerves. So your blood supply does go into your bones through veins and vessels. The vessels bring the blood, the veins carry it back to the heart. And there's also a nerve. It's often called a neurovascular bundle, because the blood vessels and the nerves travel together through the canals in the bone. When you're developing and growing, your body starts making bone, and it puts little canals in there, and then the veins, the vessel, and the nerve go in there as you're developing and growing, and that continues throughout your life cycle. So the same kind of tissues that we have in our bones would be expected and are being found in the bones that are in the earth, that are fossils. Now a lot of people use the term fossilized, which is kind of an erroneous term. I mean, the word fossil means buried in the ground, something old buried in the ground. And so they're fossilized because they're in the ground, but they haven't turned to rock. That's a different term. That's permineralization. And so what happens, there's a couple of different kinds of permineralization, but mostly the organics get replaced by minerals through supersaturated liquids passing through the bone. And that happens. We have found permineralized bones where, for example, the horn that we discovered in 2012, the 48-inch long Triceratops horn that had been sheared away from the Triceratops skull, was point down. So the big end of the horn was pointing towards the surface. And of course, in Montana and Colorado and these places where the bones are buried, it rains, right? It rains a lot. It snows, and that snow melts. There's already liquid in the ground, in the sands, because these are all sedimentary layers, so they're going to have some moisture in there. And it's colonized. It's colonized by many different decomposers and microbes and bacteria, fungi, stuff like that. And because these tissues that we described as being in your bone are still there in these non-rock bones, they're still bone, the critters go after it. And so we're finding the critters that normally decompose these things inside the bones, which is kind of a world first. So we can talk about the critters that we're finding, but that puts an outside limit on it. I mean, if they're 68 million years old, as the Cretaceous is said to be, the soft tissues in there should have long been exhausted, long ago, or decayed, because soft tissue, if you put a ham sandwich in the back porch or in the backyard and just let it sit there, it won't stay there. It won't fossilize. It's not going to turn hard. It'll be eaten by something, right? Almost immediately. Mm-hmm. And so that happens a lot more actively underground. There are hundreds of decomposers. I was amazed that we buried a dead rat that we had, and we were curious. We thought we'd go back and look at it 5 weeks later, and it was completely gone, bones and everything. So
yep.
There's stuff in the soil that just consumes that stuff right away. And so, why then are not these bones completely free of these soft tissues like you have in your bone? Why is it still in there? Is there a reason? I mean, with water going through, with heat, these dig sites go to 100 degrees in the summer and minus 30 in the winter. And so it's freeze and thaw, freeze and thaw, freeze and thaw. And then all the moisture from the rain and snow melting and going through there. So there's radiation in the ground from radionuclides that are buried throughout the ground. Why are these tissues still there? And can they really be that old? So it raises a lot of questions about how long they've been there, or the preservation mechanisms, and why are there still organisms making a living in the bones.
All right. So basically what you're saying then is when we think of fossils, we tend to think of things that have been turned to rock. But you're actually saying that there's a lot of fossils that haven't completed that process yet. Is that correct?
Yeah, most of what we dig out of the ground, I'd say 80, 85, even 90% of what we dig out of the ground is either non-permineralized at all or only slightly permineralized. Now, we do find examples of hard crystalline rock that these bones have turned into, but it's rare. Mostly they're still bone. And we use the same hospital laboratory protocol that they use. Like if you have to give a bone biopsy in a hospital, they want to check it for cancer or whatever. They use the same protocol that we're using. So we just took their protocol and we're just applying it to what we find in the ground, and it's working.
Interesting. So is that because there hasn't been enough time for these bones to permineralize?
Permineralize, yes. Well, there should have been. I mean, even if, I hold to about a 10,000-year-old Earth. Even in that amount of time, I mean, we know of fossilized hats. Felt hats have been dug up. Oranges, I know of a fossilized orange. So things do fossilize. There are ongoing experiments right now at Yellowstone in some of these hot thermal pools that are very saturated with minerals, and they're fossilizing leaves in a matter of a week.
Oh wow!
They soak them in there, and they come out hard as stone. So we know fossilization can take place very rapidly. Some of the fossils that many people have heard of include organisms eating other organisms and being caught in that act, or giving birth, or other activities. They're frozen in that position. So their preservation must have been rapid. I mean, they must have been covered probably pretty rapidly and maybe buried deeply, because all this stuff is called rework. The scientists call it reworked, so it was uplifted and maybe put back in a slurry. We get this Jurassic Park picture of whole organisms being laid out with every bone connected as it was in life, but that's not true. When we find the skeletons, they're usually torn apart, or folded on themselves. We dug out a 21-foot Edmontosaurus, a duck-billed dinosaur, but it was only about 6 feet wide because it was folded over twice on itself. So these things went through horrific changes and manipulation by what they believe are turbidity currents deep underwater. So if all these sites were 500 feet underwater, and you get these thick mud flows going along the bottom, tearing up beds and repositioning them and such, you could tear those bones apart from each other. Often we find them looking like they came out of a cement mixer. So they've been really worked, a lot of them. But yet they still possess all those tissues we talked about, and enough of the features that you can recognize them. So a paleontologist at our dig site can say, yeah, that's thus and so. I recognize it because of these features on the bone. So how is that possible? If they have been in the ground for almost 70, 75, even some of them, the Jurassic 145 million years, the Permian 290, 300 million years, and they shouldn't find anything, but we're finding beautiful nerves in the Permian, beautiful cells in the Permian, 300 million years in age. So no, there's a lot of more questions asked than answered in this business.
Right. Yeah.
And Dr. Mark, the secular viewpoint of that would be what you just said, billions of years old. Then there's just no way. Um, what would some of their explanations be for how these bones are being preserved? Is it iron preserving them?
That's one of the theories. But with the deep time paradigm, things have to happen very slowly and deliberately, and so they have surmised, and they've published it. They're clear about their position. They've published that maybe the iron preserved all the tissues, but we know just from looking in the medical literature that iron tears tissues apart. It destroys it. It's like rust on a steel bumper in Detroit in the middle of winter. If that's what it's going to do to your bumper, what would it do to your bone cells?
Yes.
Right. So,
yes.
But the iron was prevalent because of all the blood in these organisms, and so they took hold of that as hopefully an answer, but it's not proving to be true because of what we know from medicine. The other thing is we have not found a whole lot of iron in the bone except for in the canals. So where those veins and vessels were traveling, it seems like they disintegrated, but sometimes the vessels and veins are still there. We can collect those also. But these clots are prevalent throughout all these bone canals. And, he talks about that in the book of Job. Are not there bones like iron? And they literally are, because it's like iron rebar inside of these bones. And we can see that every time we thin section them. So there's these big clots. So that suggests that they asphyxiated. And we talked about that a little bit on your last program, but that's the only preservation mechanism, the iron preservation mechanism, that has been suggested by folks like Schweitzer and the other folks. But it doesn't provide a complete answer because it's not in the bone. It's not out where the cells are. It's in the canals only. So what is preserving the rest of the tissues that are in the bone if the iron's not there? So it's an inadequate explanation. Even formaldehyde, when you die, they preserve your body, they infuse you, they just pump you with formalin, and even that breaks down, over several hundred years, and your body does finally just decay and turn back to dust. So to preserve these things for long ages is really problematic.
Yeah. You mentioned iron, not doing well on the bumper of a truck. My Chevy right now is suffering from a overabundance of iron on its frame. So yes. I think I'm going to have to go buy a new one.
Right.
Would it be possible, I'm just kind of going to play devil's advocate here a little bit, but sure. Would it be possible for these things to be preserved for millions of years if it was a totally closed system? Because, it is buried, and maybe if it's buried really deep or something, you could just kind of close that system, and would that by any chance preserve things?
Well, we know now of situations like that. The bodies that have been pulled out of peat bogs, and these are probably a very acidic environment or maybe a very basic environment, but they're stabilized, and so the organisms that would break down these components that are in the soil might be absent. But yes, it would have to be a closed system with no influence from the freeze thaw or the water dripping or the nuclear decay that's naturally in the ground. They'd have to be isolated from all that. So how do you do that? Yeah, you could bury it pretty deeply, and you'd be insulated from a lot of that. But many of these are at the surface. The Triceratops horn that we dug out was 6 to 12 inches from the surface. So it was right at the surface. And man, all that stuff growing and living on the surface. And, a lot of the microbes go down about 50 centimeters, maybe to 100 centimeters in depth, but not much deeper. But these things are right in the middle of all that. And yet they produce the most beautiful cells you've ever seen, the most beautiful nerves dripping with lipids that you've ever seen. Just amazing and totally recognizable. An anatomist can look at the nerve slides that we have and say, yep, that's a nerve. Where did it come from? A dinosaur? No. No, it couldn't come from that. But it does.
Huh. Wow.
And would factors like heating or cooling help in the preservation of it to keep it?
Well, a cold temperature, and that's how we, when we do in vitro fertilization, all those embryos are frozen at liquid and nitrogen temperatures. But that would have to have been maintained over 70 million years. So,
Rather unlikely.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So then if maybe some of these secular explanations aren't holding up very well, what would be some of the creation explanations? And one thing I'll kind of throw in here was actually here on tour not too long ago at the museum, I actually had somebody when I was talking about the soft tissue and things found in our Triceratops bone. He was wondering, is it even possible for things like that to last thousands of years, or are you guys finding something else? So maybe address that.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think I explained in the other broadcast that the reason I got into this field is because I was trained at the university as a soft tissue expert. So if a professor or student came into my lab with a jellyfish or a planaria worm or a plant, I had to preserve those tissues for study under the microscope. Which is routine. That's what we do as microscopists. We prepare tissues through different protocols to be examined, and you want to preserve that structure as much as possible. So you don't want to introduce error into it. We call it artifact. We can create, artifacts which are damage in the tissues if we don't process them properly, and then that shows up when they do the microscopy. So really learning the protocol and following the protocol exactly is paramount in university settings and hospitals. The pathologists that look at our tissues and diagnose our diseases have to see the regular structure that they're used to seeing, or they cannot diagnose it. So it's the same thing in regular biology. In order to really understand what you're looking at, you have to preserve the architecture, and that stuff falls apart really quickly. When I was trained to do tissues in the lab, we had to have buckets of ice, and all of our reagents were at 4 degrees centigrade, which is, very cold. And we would put our tissues in these cold reagents, and then as we moved them through the process, they would sit in these ice buckets down the counter. Until you finished it and finally finished stabilizing it so that you could put it on a slide permanently. We say permanently, but they're only good for about 100 years or less. But that's after all that work, putting 80, 90 hours into a tissue just for somebody to look at it on the electron microscope, and still they don't last that long. So, and I've often said, if iron preservation works, and it is preserving tissue for 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 million years. Why haven't they patented that thing? I mean, man, you could sell a car out of that. Hey, we'll preserve your body for science, and when science comes around in 1 million years, they'll be able to revive your body. And that'd be a moneymaker right there, right? So
Sure.
No, it's ridiculousness. They're grasping at straws, and the iron preservation method doesn't work. And when you look at the experiments they conducted to quote unquote prove that, they took ostrich blood and emu blood, and they modified it. The first thing they did is when they collected that blood, they injected an anticoagulant into it. Why? Blood clots, right? It clots right away.
Right.
So you got to prevent the clotting. You have to stop the clotting before it starts by putting EDTA in there, which is an anticoagulant. It keeps it from clotting. Then you have to spin it down in a very fast centrifuge, 60,000 RPM, these big $100,000 centrifuges. And they spun it down like 6 or 7 times to get all the, they had to break open the red blood cells and get all the cell, structures out of there. All they wanted was the stuff inside the cell. So all those broken cell parts had to be centrifuged out. Then they centrifuged out all the clotting factors, all the proteins that make up the clotting cascade. Because it is a cascade. It's a one-way reaction. You get a cut or you have some trauma, you start the clotting reaction right away, and you can actually use up all the reagents in your body, and then you start bleeding out. So it's really a poor mechanism to call upon to preserve the elegant beauty of these tissues that we're in the living dinosaurs that walked the earth, and they're gone, but these tissues are still there. So how can that be?
Yeah.
Mm.
So it sounds like the evidence that we find has a lot more base to find its source from what we find in God's word.
Well, if there's no preservation mechanism, then what is preserving them? Why are they still here?
Mm-hmm.
I believe it's God that left them here to show us that his judgment is real. His judgment is harsh. And he's promised a second judgment with fire this time.
Mm-hmm.
And there's enough methane and frozen on the bottom of the seafloor to ignite the whole planet. And it's bubbling up at this time. You can light on fire these bubbling gases at the surface in Alaska right now. People are doing that. So if that comes up, it's gonna put the whole planet on fire, which is what God promised if we don't straighten up and fly right. So it really speaks to his providence, his ownership and control, his designation as a creator and owner, and he will fulfill what he has said. He already did it with the flood, and we're finding this layer all around the earth. This Cretaceous layer is all around the earth, and all these dinosaurs are plugged into it.
So if the world is just thousands of years old, 6,000 years old-ish, then Noah's flood would have happened, roughly 4,500 years ago. Is it possible for this tissue to even last 4,500 years, or would we have expected it under normal conditions to have all disappeared by now?
Right. Based on my training at the university level over decades, it should not be there.
Okay.
So it was unexpected, and I was shocked when I first saw it. And I had to go out and find out for myself, and I have. It's been proven to me over and over that this stuff is there, and it looks fresh. So how is that possible? I can't think of a preservation mechanism based on chemistry or anything else that would keep these things in this state. Being in the ground, just naked in the ground, in an open system available to all the vagaries that are in the ground, the microbes, the worms. Why are we finding living worms inside these bones? Because they're still able to make a living in there. How is that possible? So by my training, the answer is no, it shouldn't be there. But I guess now that I've looked at enough of it, it just doesn't surprise me because it's a God thing. That's I guess what I come back to. If God is in charge of this, then it is to be expected. It's something that he would do to leave us a record so that we know we can have assurance that his word really is believable and we can trust it. So I think it's his providence that is keeping these things there.
So in other words, you're saying it's basically more or less a miracle that God's preserving these things, and that there's really is no natural explanation for how soft tissue can be preserved for even thousands of years.
Yeah, it kind of is the M word, isn't it? Because the bugs are there, the microbes are there. We're finding insect remains inside these bones. Obviously, the worms, both living and dead, but pulling living worms out of dinosaur bones. They're taking advantage of this as a food resource, and we have a whole food web in there. That's what we're going to present on this summer at the Microscopy Side of America conference, is that it's a food web. Who would have thought? But it defies any rational, stochastic, scientific explanation for why they're there. And that's why in the beginning they all labeled this as, no, this is a biofilm. It's made by bacteria. So I'm to understand that bacteria eats a bone cell and then poops out a bone cell that looks like what it just ate, but it's not. That would be a Nobel Peace Prize if you prove that. Because that's never been seen before, right? Yeah. So no, that's why they called it, contamination. But Dr. Schweitzer did very careful work and showed that no, this is not contamination. These are the original tissues from the living dinosaur that was somehow buried in this dirt. Now they'll give you a little story about how the dinosaur was walking along a river and choked on something and fell over and died. Right. But if that had happened, the blood would have pooled. All the blood, we know this from forensic science, all the blood would have pooled to the bottom part of the body. You can just look this up. Look up livor, Livor, mortis, and look at the pictures, and you'll see all these animals and people with purple bodies where they were touching the ground. So all the blood would drain to the bottom. We're finding clots throughout. So we think they died of asphyxiation when they were thrown into these tsunami waters, and then they were covered up in the mud slurries that were rushing along the bottom in turbidity currents. So it's a perfectly reasonable explanation for why we're seeing what we're seeing, but it doesn't, of course, fit the deep time paradigm.
Well, Dr. Mark, you have done a phenomenal job of explaining what you have been finding in your discoveries of these fossils with blood tissue and bacteria, and it's just amazing, and we really appreciate you being here. And we know that being taught evolution is very detrimental to this world. Like our children are being taught evolution in the schools, and we're basically led to believe that we're here for no purpose at all. We're just a random accident that just came all together coincidentally, and that's not what the scriptures say, and that's not what the evidence that we see today points to. We see that God,
Right.
our Creator, created this earth and mankind in His own image, and that we were made on purpose for a purpose, and that it is sin that separates us from Him. That is why we live in this completely broken world. That is why we see judgment, and we see sickness and disease and death. Death was not part of the original plan that God had. And our sins, we can't remove them by any good deeds of our own. We're hopeless without somebody to come in and rescue us from our sins against an almighty and holy God. And
which is exactly what Jesus did, right?
Exactly.
He paved the way for
He
us to
did.
go. But yeah, no, it's shocking, but it is a testimony that God's judgment is real, and that we need to be ready for it. But all it takes is trust. All you have to do is trust, and it is credited to you as righteousness, right?
Yes, if we believe in our hearts that Jesus is Lord, confessing with our mouths that God raised Him from the dead, we will be saved. And knowing that
Amen.
Christ went to the cross because of us, it was our sin that put Him there. And just how serious that separation is that we all experience from God because of that sin against Him, and that God had mercy and He showed compassion to mankind by sending His one and only Son, and who He raised from the dead.
Trust in Him is really liberating. A lot of people, in fact, before I became a Christian, I thought, oh no, I'm going to not have fun ever again in my life. But it is so liberating to let go of all that stuff and walk in the light with Him. It really is refreshing and energizing. So if you're on the fence, jump in. The water's fine. Give Jesus a real try before you give up on it.
Yes, He is good and faithful. And we, like you said, that judgment will come someday, and we need to be ready. We need to know that no matter when that happens, what happens when we die, that we will be with Him in heaven someday forever because of what His Son did on the cross for us.
Yep. Amen.
All right. Well, Dr. Mark, thank you so much for joining us today. And how can people learn more about the Dinosaur Soft Tissue Research Institute and the work that you all are doing there?
Well, we give everything away. We're all volunteers, and we don't sell anything. So DSTRI.org, and those are the first letters that come from each of the words in Dinosaur Soft Tissue Research Institute. So DSTRI.org, and you can download our papers that we present and publish at these secular meetings. We have 3 books there that are great for PhDs and kids alike, and videos. And then we also have a YouTube channel with a lot of videos. If you go to YouTube and search Mark H. Armitage, that channel will come up. But everything's free. Give us feedback. Let us know what you'd like to see or have answers for. And come on a dig. Everybody's invited. Everybody can come on a dig. All you got to do is pay your way. And you can go home with real dinosaur bones. We came home with a lot of T-Rex this last week. A lot of T-Rex, and it's all bone. It's not rock. So we can't wait to dig into it.
Oh.
Well, I think I probably will take you up on that at some point because
Awesome.
I've been itching to go back to Montana anyway, and to actually do some
Yes.
digging would be really
Everybody
cool.
wants to go, so come with us. It's a lot of fun.
All right. Well, thanks again, Dr. Mark. We really
Yes, thank
appreciate
you.
Yeah,
the
thank
work
you.
that you all are doing, and may the Lord bless you all.
Thank you so much.
This podcast is produced by the Creation Ministries of the Ozarks, which also operates the Creation Experience Museum in Branson, Missouri. If you're in the Branson area, come visit us and get a free guided tour and see how science confirms the Bible. You can book your free tour at creationexperiencemuseum.com or call us at 417-561-0750. We encourage you to follow us on Instagram and Facebook. On behalf of our entire team, I'm Preston Knapp, inviting you to join us again next time as we continue to explore the marvels of God's creation and grow in our love for Christ.